Today in our 2015 GMC Terrain, we're going to be taking a look at the Roadmaster InvisiBrake Supplemental Braking System, part number RM-8700. With our InvisiBrake installed, it's going to give us real-time braking while we're towing our terrain down the road with our motorhome. Now it's going to activate our brakes on our towed vehicle whenever we apply the brakes in our RV. Now, the main benefit of this braking system over many others is that it's a permanent installation, and once we have it set up, we're not going to have to make any adjustments. There's going to be a clamp and a pulley that pulls directly on our brake pedal, so even though we have that clamp attached to our pedal, it is going to be a lot less cumbersome than some of the other braking systems that have the entire actuator mounted to the pedal. Now our actuator box is going to hide away in our cargo area, and we're going to have full adjustment of our braking force all the way from 5 to 80 psi. You can simply pull out on the knob, turn to the right for more pressure, turn to the left for less pressure, and then lock it in place. Now the more pressure we have, the more force that our brakes are going to be applied. And obviously the less pressure, the less force are going to be applied. Now when we're driving down the road, we're not going to have to worry about any false braking situations. It's only going to apply the brakes in our terrain when our RV's brake lights come on. Now in our motorhome, it's also going to have a 2-stage monitor. We're going to have a visual light to let us know when we're pushing on the brake and when the brakes are applied in our towed vehicle. Now after about 15 seconds, it's going to release the brakes in our towed vehicle to protect the brakes from getting overheated and wearing them out. But at the same time, in the case of an emergency or a breakaway situation, an audible alarm will go off if the brakes have been applied for more than 20 seconds. So now we can see our InvisiBrake in action as we go through our test course. With everything in place, and we've seen how everything works and gone over some of the features, we'll give you a brief overview of how everything is installed. Now, if you need a more in-depth view of an installation, we do have a video on a 2017 GMC Terrain, which is going to be the same vehicle and have all the same steps. Now, the first thing you're going to want to do is plan your installation out before you start doing anything. We chose to put our controller in the back in the cargo area, and I carved out some of the foam by the spare tire so it'll sit in there nicely. To carve out the foam, I simply just took a Dremel tool and cut out the pieces that I needed to fit this in there. Then I'm going to come back some self-tapping screws and secure it to the floor. Now up in the driver's seat, you're going to need to pull back the carpet, and we're going to be mounting a pulley, and it's very important that you get the bracket attached to the brake pedal itself in line with the pulley that you're going to mount on the floor or against the firewall, so that when the pedal is fully depressed, it's going to be in line and the cable is going to pull directly straight. Now the bracket that's going around our brake pedal itself is 2 pieces. There's going to be an L shape for one, and it's going to be a straight piece for the other. And they're just going to sandwich that brake pedal arm between it, and we're going to have a couple bolts and nuts that are going to be going through. Now, if these interfere with any kind of daily driving, you can trim the bolts off, as well as the clamp itself. That way it doesn't interfere with your feet and cause any problems. The cable coming off the pulley, I have wrapped underneath the carpet in a big loop. You don't want any tight kinks or anything like that. So I have a big loop coming up and around, and it comes to this air cylinder right here, and that's what's going to be actuating that cable and pulling on the pedal. Now back at the controller, we're going to have several different ports that we're going to have a few things to plug into. The small section here, this is where our air line for our air cylinder is going to tap into. So we're going to be plugging it in here and routing it towards the front. Now this section, we're going to take a piece of the 1/4-inch vacuum tube, put it over the nipple on the controller, and then we're going to put a 1/4-inch diameter air line in there, and we're also going to be routing that towards the front of our car. Then we're going to have a 4-wire connector. It's going to have black and red, and then a black wire, and that's going to be for our power and our ground for our controller, as well as our breakaway switch. Finally, we're going to have 4-pole wiring, which is going to be our ground, taillights, left and right turn signals, which we're going to have to tap into the existing wiring for our towing setup. So we ran our air line for our air cylinder, the vacuum line, as well as our breakaway switch, power and ground towards the front, and I'll show you how we got it up there. So my wires along with my vacuum and air line tubes, I ran underneath the panel right here, and then I came out to the passenger side rear door continued along the threshold until I got up to the front. So to get those panels off, I just used the trim panel tool. You can just use whatever you have available, even if it's just a flathead screwdriver. Just want to get underneath those panels and pop up the plastic clips. A lot of times you can just grab them with your hand and gently pull up. But I ran all those wires and airline tubes, and I took the skinny one and I attached it to the air cylinder up front. And the way this is going to attach is you just take your airline tube and you're going to push it in until you feel like it bottoms out. Then give it one more good push to make sure, and it'll be nice and secure. So the rest of my vacuum, airline tubes, and my breakaway switch, I drilled a hole through the floor pan right in front of the emergency brake cable. Just want to always double check that there's nothing underneath that you'll damage. So I drilled a hole and then took a plastic split grommet and put it in place so I don't have to worry about the wires rubbing. Now the wires in the vacuum line, you're going to want to run up to the engine bay up here. Now as far as the wires go, I came right to my fuse panel area right here. The wires came up, I ran them behind the fuse panel. I had a factory ground that I connected my black wire to with all the included ring terminals as well. And then my red wire, I took the provided fuse holder, put it in place along with the 20 amp fuse, and connected it to the jump post right here for my positive battery post. Now for my vacuum line, just like we did at the back, we're going to take another piece of that 1/4 inch vacuum hose and we're going to attach it to it. Now you're going to want to pull the vacuum hose off of your brake booster, and I went ahead and disconnected the electric connector that was connected to it as well, and I just pulled it off for easier access. You're going to want to come downstream from the brake booster just a little bit, and they're going to give you a T, so you're going to want to cut your vacuum line, put one end into the hose coming off the brake booster, then they give you another section of hose. You can go ahead and put that on the other end. And then if we go farther down, going towards the engine, we're going to have a check valve. Now the check valve is very important that you put it in the correct orientation. When you have the check valve in your hand, the red end is going to go towards the engine. And then we can connect it into the other side of our brake booster vacuum line, and the other line that we attach to the T. And then finally, that third section, we're going to put that 1/4 inch vacuum hose into the small end of our T, and we can reconnect our vacuum hose. And just push it back into the brake booster, and then we can reconnect our electric connector. Now we did have that one more black wire that came from that bundle. Now it's going to end up at the front of your vehicle, so you're going to want to route it from underneath, routing it straight forward, and I just suggest that you stay away from any heat sources and any moving parts. And then we're going to need to find a spot to mount our breakaway switch. Now for us, our base plate had a connection point right here, but if yours doesn't, you want to make sure that you mount your breakaway switch on a solid surface that's metal and not just drilling it into the plastic of your bumper. Now the kit is going to come with a bolt and a nut so you can securely attach your breakaway switch. Then you're going to want to run the wire off the switch and meet up with the wire that we ran underneath the vehicle. Now we have our 4-pole wiring left. Now this is going to depend on where your wiring came out, what kind of wiring you have, and so forth. In our application, we had a diode kit in ours, and our wiring did come out towards the back, so we just ran our wires along underneath the foam, and there's a grommet that we came down to underneath the car right over here. Now once you go down through that grommet, like I said, you're going to want to meet up with the existing 4-pole wiring underneath, and you're going to want to splice them in color for color. Now the only difference is that when you splice into your white wire, you're going to want to have a separate ground as well, because you need to ground the controller by itself and not just tap into an existing ground. Now the InvisiBrake also has a monitor light, so we know what's going on in our car from our motorhome. So we're going to take the connecting wire here. We're going to have two that look like this. One's going to be 50 foot long and one's going to be 15 feet long. You're going to want to take the shorter one and to find a location close to the front where you can mount it towards your electrical connector. We chose to put ours right here at the bottom. You're going to use a couple zip ties to secure it, and you're going to want to follow this wire, and we ran ours in the same path that we took our breakaway switch and went back into the car. Now you're going to have plenty of wire to get up inside the car. So as you can see, we still have a lot of excess that we're going to need to tie up and tidy up when we're done. But you're going to need to find your brake pedal, and you're going to follow it all the way up, and we're going to need to find the cold side of the brake switch. Now, our GMC Terrain doesn't have a cold side of the brake switch. I pulled this panel off so you can get a better idea of what we're going to need to do. But we're going to follow the brake arm up, and we're going to install a stoplight switch, and you can pick one of those up on our website using part number RM-751439. And we're going to have two wires coming off of our stoplight switch. One of them is going to connect to our indicator wire that we ran towards the front of the vehicle, and the other one is going to be for our power source. On our Terrain, we're going to have a couple different options of where we get our power from. We can either run this wire directly to the battery and put a fuse holder in place, or we can use the provided fuse tap and run over to the fuse panel on the passenger side, which is what we did. So I just ran my wire over from the driver's side through the center console area and brought it over to the passenger side. And you're going to want to test all of your fuses to make sure that you're getting power even when the vehicle's in tow mode with the key off. That way you know that it's going to get power when we're towing it down the road. Now, as I mentioned, it's going to come with a fuse tap, and that fuse tap, all it's going to do is it's going to hold two fuses and then have a spot where we can put it back into our fuse panel. So you're going to want to put the factory fuse closest to the pins and then the provided 10 amp fuse on top. And once you have them both in place, we can go ahead and put the fuse tap and insert it where the fuse would go. And that's how we're going to get power to our stoplight switch. Just for reference, we used spot 37, which had a factory 10 amp fuse in it, which on the bottom, you'll find a 5 amp fuse just to the right of it. Now, since we have that wire on the front of our car, we're going to need a mounting wire on our motorhome. So we chose to pick a spot close to our electrical connector again and have the other end of our wire there. So just like before, we have the same connector, and there's going to be a jumper cable that's going to go in between our motorhome and our car, and that's why they have the same end. But we're going to want to run this wire from back here, and you're going to want to follow the frame, staying away from any moving parts or heat sources, and go all the way to the front until we can get it towards the front and go up into the dash. Now, every motorhome is going to be different, but ours we just found the steering column, and there was a lot of electrical connections going into the dash going up. So we just found an existing grommet with some factory wiring, and we put a slit in the grommet and followed it up so that we could pass our wire through. So our wires came up from the floor and we ran them up to the dash. Now our kit does come with an indicator light and an audible alert. Now what you're going to do is you're going to take both of the red wires from the audible alert and the indicator light, and you're going to tie them together and tie them to the wire that was coming from underneath. Now in order to get your indicator light in place, you're going to drill a 5/16 inch hole through the dash, and as again, you want to make sure there's nothing behind there that's going to get damaged or anything that might interfere. Then you're going to feed your indicator light wires first through the hole, make your connections, and then the other wire is going to be a white wire coming off of both the audible alert and the indicator light, and that's going to be for your ground. Now we chose to tie those together and run a wire back down and ground it directly to the frame. So with all the connections made, we can go ahead and take a self-tapping screw and secure our controller in place. Now with everything complete and all of our connections made, you're going to want to put all your panels back and make sure all the wires and everything else is nice and tidy. As you can see, that plastic cover where our dead pedal is going to go is going to cover up that cylinder completely. Now when you put your carpet back, you're going to have to cut a section out for the pulley to have room and for the cable so that it doesn't rub up against it and cause any problems. With everything connected and all of our panels back in place, I'm going to go ahead and pull the breakaway switch and make sure that the pulley operates and pulls on that pedal. So I went ahead and hooked up the Terrain in my motorhome just to make sure that everything is working properly together. So at the front here, we're going to have our indicator light wire, and we're going to have a jumper wire that's going to connect to our vehicle on one end. Then we're going to run it over to the other end at our motorhome, and we can connect it to the motorhome on the other side. Now let's go ahead and move inside the motorhome and make sure the indicator light is working. Now inside my motorhome, if I push on the brake, we can see that the indicator light comes on, which means the brakes are being applied in the Terrain as well. Now if I let go, the light's going to go out, letting me know that the brakes are released. Now in an emergency situation, where the breakaway switch is pulled, the brakes are going to be applied in our vehicle and the light is going to come on in our dash. Now, if we're not looking down or we don't see the light for whatever reason, there is going to be an audible alarm after a few seconds of the brakes being applied consistently. Now that we know that everything's working properly, we can go ahead and hit the road and start our adventure. That'll finish up your look at the Roadmaster InvisiBrake Supplemental Braking System, part number RM-8700 on our 2015 GMC Terrain. Thanks for watching. Click the link in our description below to shop, learn more, or visit us at eTrailer.com and leave us a comment if you have any questions.